Thanks everybody for joining us today. We're gonna just take a minute or two and let folks come on in. While we're waiting, maybe in the chat, you want to say where you are calling in from or coming to us from, your hometown today, and so we know who we have with us and what areas of the country might be represented. We have we have over 100 people registered for today's session. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. High Point, North Carolina, Indianapolis, Chicago, Baton Rouge, Carmel, Indiana, another Chicago, Chincoteague Island, wish I was there now. Denver, Atlanta, another Chicago, Columbia. Hello, Peggy Hoffman. Milwaukee, Chicago. Thanks again for joining us. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Orange County, California. Wisconsin. We'll wait just another minute for people to get on. We're still seeing some activity with people joining us. Okay, I think we'll get started. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for Association Xchange May's program. I'm Sherry Singer, president of Singer Communications, and Association Xchange has actually been around for about 5 years. We've brought about 50 webinars and in-person meetings to folks. And today we're going to be talking about elevating excellence, chapter benchmarking for organizational growth. And we're going to ask you that if you have questions or comments to put those into the chat rather than using the Q&A function. We do have a program scheduled for June. We are in the process of setting that up now. Look on Collaborate for promotions about our May program. I also want to let you know that in June, we take a 2-month hiatus in July and August, and we come back in September. So thanks again for joining us today. And I'm going to turn it over to Carrie McIntyre, who's going to introduce our speaker today.
Great. Thanks, Sherry. Hey, everybody. I'm Carrie McIntyre. I'm the founder of Navigate, and I specialize in helping associations increase non-dues revenue by making sure staff are confident with their sales hat and industry partners have a great customer experience. I am super excited to introduce today's speaker, Christi Beatty, who is the Vice President of Chapter Services and Member Engagement with the Associated General Contractors of America. I've known Christi for a number of years, and she's so good at what she does. Last summer, we were talking about benchmarking programs, and when she told me what AGC was doing, I had 2 immediate thoughts. The first was that in 30 years of working in the association space, I mostly hear combative adjectives for national chapter relations, at best complicated. And I just felt like what she was doing was such a fantastic way to shift the dynamic in a much more positive direction. And then my second thought was everybody needs to know about this if they're doing national chapter relations. So when Sherry Singer asked me to volunteer for AXC this year, and pick a great topic and speaker for one of the webinars, there was only one name on my list, and that was Christi. So I'm really excited that she's this month's presenter, and I'm going to go ahead and let Christi take it from here.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you for all the kind words, and to Association Xchange for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. I'd love to know, I know that we've heard where folks are hailing from today, and I know we have people from all over the country, so thank you for joining us. I am wondering if you have chapters. How many of you have chapters? If you'll take a minute and just drop that into the chat, I would really appreciate it. It'll give me an idea of the audience and so yes, lots of folks have chapters, global chapters. All right, very good. Thank you so much. So when Carrie asked me to do this, I said to her, I said, gosh, you know, it would be a privilege to talk about this. It is a program that we launched a few years ago. It's not a perfect program. I am going to share how it works for us. And hopefully there will be a tidbit here that you can take advantage of or you can learn from today. So a little bit about me. This is not a picture of me. This is my sidekick, though. I've spent my entire career in association management. And I believe it or not, I've done that on purpose. I came out of college and I started working with ASAE. I've worked for professional societies. I've worked for trade associations, and I absolutely love what I do. I get to, and I have the privilege of connecting CEOs, association leaders, and people, members with tools, resources, and people who can help them be successful. I work with a great team of people at AGC of America, including lots of CEOs who run the chapters at AGC of America. I am a huge champion of continuous improvement. I probably could name just as many things that my team and I have failed at over the years as things that we've been successful with. I'm a big believer in pilots. I'm a big believer in trying new things and being innovative in solving problems. I am lucky to be a mom of 5 kids, and my kids are all grown, and my husband and I are empty nesters. But for some reason, we thought getting a puppy was a good idea, and so this is my sidekick here, Guinness. He's a 10-month Bernedoodle and keeps us busy. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk a little bit about benchmarking and how it works, what it is, how we've used it at AGC of America, how we've defined key performance indicators that are part of this benchmarking study that we do every year, how we've set goals and strategies using really the data that has come out of this benchmarking report. I want to share some high-level results. We now have 4 years of results, and so we've truly been able to benchmark our chapter's progress. And I have some case studies and some success stories from some of our chapters that I'd love to share with you, just so you can see the impact that a tool like a benchmarking study can have. And I'm also going to share some lessons learned along the way. Like I said, not everything that we've done has been perfect over the years. We've had to tweak the assessment, the benchmarking assessment, and I'll walk through some of the things that we've learned. So just a little background. I think it's important that everybody kind of understand the type of organization that I work with. So AGC is a full service trade association. We have 89 affiliated chapters, all in 50 states, plus Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. Some states, as you might guess, have more than one chapter. Our chapters in Texas, I think we have about 11. So all spread out across the country. Some are statewide, some are metro chapters. All are unique and independent organizations. Collectively, with our chapters, we have 28,000 member firms. Members must first join the chapter, and then they're automatically a member of the national organization. We spend a lot of time, the national organization spends a lot of time focusing on protecting our members from onerous regulations. Our team of lobbyists advocate on behalf of a wide range of important legislative and regulatory issues. We provide education, safety services, and we work really hard to focus on building community and creating community for members so that they can share their challenges, best practices, and come together to find solutions. We do all of this in partnership and support of our chapters. Our chapters are a very tight-knit group of organizations. They are independent on paper. We are a federated model, which I know a lot of associations are. It does create, as Carrie was mentioning, some challenges. You can have national organizations sometimes have adverse relationships with their chapters, and there's often a push-pull and a lot of competition. And we've worked really hard to build this partnership so that we're working in tandem with each other. And I realize that this might be unique and that your organization and your chapters may be entirely managed by volunteers. We are very fortunate in that all 89 of our chapters have paid staff. They range in size, certainly, budget, staff size, membership size, but I can say that all 89 of them do enjoy having paid staff, and that certainly can make a difference. But I do think benchmarking can work for an organization, whether you have volunteers at the helm of your components or if they're paid. So a little bit about the partnership. So I mentioned that we are in tight partnership with our chapters. This partnership between the national organization and our chapters, it's fairly formalized in that we have something called an Executive Leadership Council, or we call it the ELC, with a board of directors made up of chapter executives. This group is made up of chapter CEOs who work closely with the national organization. The group has its own strategic plan. They work closely with the national organization to ensure that the mission of the ELC and the mission of AGC of America really is in somewhat of alignment, and that we align our goals together. This is a picture of the officers for the ELC. I will mention that the two top leaders from the ELC sit on the National Board of Directors. That's important because it makes sure that our chapters have a voice at that board table. And they often are looked to whenever there's a decision at the national board level. One of the first questions that always gets asked by those board members is, what do the chapters think? How are the chapters going to respond to this decision or this issue that we're contemplating? The other thing that I'll mention about our chapters is that in the last 10 years, we've seen approximately 50% of the CEOs in these roles retire. People stay in these jobs for a long time. They have long tenures. They've been with their chapters for 30, 40 years. But it also means that now, within the last 10 years, we've had a lot of new executives come on. Many of them are very green. Some of them, it's the first time that they're CEOs. They are following in the footsteps of leaders who have been in these roles for decades in some cases. And what we've seen is that as a new exec, they can feel kind of overwhelmed. And if they're in a position where they're called to kind of modernize the organization, ensure that the organization is relevant for the future, but also tread lightly when it comes to sacred cows. So when the ELC board went through their most recent strategic planning exercise a few years ago, there was an effort to really clarify the mission and put a greater focus on supporting our chapter executives and their staffs with practical tools and resources to help them succeed. One of the tools that the ELC board felt would be of value to our chapter execs across the network was something that they called a chapter self-assessment. And that's the benchmarking tool that we're going to talk about today. And they wanted to be able to measure key performance indicators. This tool was going to be created by ELC members, so the group of chapter execs, and made available to all chapters on an annual basis. It was going to be optional. And you're going to hear me talk about carrots versus sticks a little bit today. I think carrots are a whole lot more effective than sticks are. And I'll share with you a little bit more why we did what we did and how we really encouraged that participation. We needed to build trust and ensure that the execs understood that the data we were collecting through this benchmarking tool would not be used against them, and it wasn't going to be used to embarrass them. We never, ever want to embarrass our leaders. We don't want to embarrass our chapters, especially if we say that we want to be partners with them. So all of that was really important. So the goal that the ELC set was by 2025, we want 80% of our chapters to be high performing. So why did we choose benchmarking? Those of you who have chapters and components, you know that your independent components can either lift you up and lift up the brand, or they can impact it in a negative way. Our chapters are in closer proximity to the members than the national organization is. So the strength of our chapters matter. If we knew if we could strengthen the parts, we'll strengthen the whole and we'll improve the member process and the member experience across the brand. We can't necessarily be Starbucks and deliver the same cup of latte across the network in every single market, but we wanted to challenge our components to be the best they could be and to be high performing at what they do. We led with the mantra of high performing people are constantly self-assessing. And we wanted to give them a tool that the chapter leaders, so that they could understand better how their chapters stacked up against other chapters and how well they were meeting some of these KPIs. And then finally, we said, you know what? Peter Drucker has always said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And we weren't measuring much of anything across all of our chapters. So this was a real opportunity for us to dig in and to really show some value and give them a tool that they could use. So here's what it is. We call it the AGC Chapter Self-Assessment. It's a tool to measure and benchmark a chapter's annual performance. It's an online survey that was created by the ELC board for the ELC members. And it's essentially two surveys in one. For years and years, we've done a demographic survey. So the chapters were already used to doing this demographic survey, but we really were just counting things in that survey. How many meetings do you have? Do you have a membership director? Do you have a safety director? Do you rent or own your space? And so we added a lot of these questions, these benchmarking questions. So they were already accustomed to taking a survey. So bringing them an online experience, they loved, they were super excited about. And because it gave them so many results and so many metrics that they could share with their board and with their staff, they were willing to give us the data in order to get something back. So here's how it works. It's a survey that takes probably 30 to 45 minutes. I would say the first time a chapter completes it, it took about 45 minutes to complete. Now, because of the way the platform works, chapters can fill this sucker out in 20 to 30 minutes. It allows them to get their entire, if they want to, their entire chapter team to help them fill it out. So it doesn't have to be a big chore for one person. It launches every summer. The results, the reports, and the scorecard are all available in the fall and the winter. And participants get to access the results once they have completed all of the required questions. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure of, and one of the things that we learned along the way, was we first set some KPIs, some key performance indicators, things that, and we created sections in this benchmarking tool. One was around membership growth and retention and engagement. We certainly wanted to look at financial viability. We wanted to look at a chapter's reserves. We wanted to understand how they were operating, how chapters were maybe different, but also similar. Looking at operations allowed us to look at maybe ways in which we could create some efficiencies from the national level. We looked at communications and marketing. There's a section on leadership and governance. Are our chapters practicing good governance? This was an opportunity for them to tell us and show us how they were, did they have an antitrust policy in place? Were they using a conflict of interest statement with their boards? Were they orienting and onboarding their boards when a new board came on? And then looking at certainly member service and digging into that value proposition chapter by chapter. So I mentioned it on the last slide, measure what matters. And this is a really, really important concept, because you don't want to measure everything, because some things on the assessment really just show you how your chapters are different. So we decided that there were only really going to be 5 things that really mattered. And there are a few things that we measure, but the most important things on this assessment that we measure are around these 5 things that really point to whether any business is being successful. We're looking at membership retention. And the ELC set a goal of 95% or better. I will tell you that it's an audacious goal that they're going for. Very few of our chapters have reached it. But I will say that 90-some% of our chapters are already above 90%, which is industry average. They set a goal of net growth, a 5-year average of contractor growth. They, for the first time ever, had a conversation about measuring market penetration. And so this assessment asks a number of questions about market penetration and really challenges them to look at and understand what the potential in their market is for growth. We looked at financial viability. We wanted to understand if they had enough reserves in the bank. And we set a metric of 6 to 12 months for any given chapter. And we're also measuring average annual net operating income. And we're really challenging our chapters to use these metrics to determine if they are truly a high-performing organization. And I will tell you, if the chapter's high performing in these 5 areas, they're performing really well in some other areas too. They're getting great membership engagement. They're creating excitement. They're doing good work in the communications and marketing space. And so these really, we kept the list short on purpose so that people, the chapter executives in particular, could focus on the things that really truly mattered. So from a participation standpoint, I am super excited that I always say, you know, part of my job, part of what I do is I'm a professional cat herder. Getting all of our chapters, and those of you who do this work know that if you could get all of your chapters to walk in a straight line, it would probably be a miracle. So getting 84% of our chapters to actually participate in this self-assessment since it launched has been huge. Our board has been excited about that, and our chapters have gotten a lot of value out of it. So I want to share a little bit. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about just some high-level results, because I think it's important for you to be able to see kind of the benchmarking that we've been able to do. So one of the things we said was really important was year over year net contractor growth. And you can see from this chart, obviously we launched this during COVID. COVID was tough on a lot of organizations, and we were not special in that way. We certainly took a bit of a dip in 2021, but you can see that our year-over-year contractor growth has started to increase. I've been with AGC now for the last 10 years, and 2023, the end of 2023 into 2024, we finally are starting to see some real growth numbers in our membership, which we had not seen probably in a decade or more. Chapters reporting a 95% or greater retention of members. You can see in 2020, when we first started measuring it, we had only 40% of our chapters told us that they were at that 95% retention level. In 2023, we're almost at 70% of our chapters. So we've made some real progress on having chapters focus on retention. Average total expenses versus revenue for prior fiscal year. Again, this is an area where you can see total expenses really during COVID outweighed revenues. I think a lot of organizations experience this, but you can see 2023, we've kind of reversed that, and our chapters are now working toward building those reserves back up. And here, speaking of reserves, you can see the effects that COVID did have. We're now able to measure that. We're now able to see that in real time and to measure what our chapters are experiencing. So I want to just take a few minutes and talk a little bit about show you a couple of case studies, how our chapters are actually taking this tool and using it with their boards, using it to make decisions, using it to impact the way and how they're addressing some of the areas where they might need some help. So one chapter, self-assessment scorecard, and I haven't mentioned this yet, but part of the program, part of the output, once a chapter participates in this program, they get access to tons of reports, tons of charts that they can either look at themselves. I always tell a chapter executive, you can access this study, this benchmarking study, in lots of different ways. You can use the tool in various ways. You can look at it. You can decide perhaps that you don't really love your results in year one, and you might throw that in the trash or put it in a drawer somewhere. You might actually use it to improve your strategic planning process or inform your strategic planning process. But in one case, I had a chapter that saw from this assessment, they intuitively knew that they were losing members. But when you have the scorecard and it is staring you in the face and it says you're losing members, and if you're not growing, you're dying. And so the chapter said, we've got to find a way to reverse the results of this. So they shared the results. The chapter exec was very brave in this case, took the results to the board and said, look, I can't reverse the trend. I can't have an impact on bringing more members in if I don't dedicate some staff to focus on membership development. And so he made the case for hiring 2 new dedicated membership staff in 2023 in order to reverse the trend. Now, I will say that the chapter exec has told me recently, look, I'm not fully above board in terms of paying for these 2 positions. Like, we're not at a break-even standpoint. We're still investing in these 2 people. But they have added 61 new members in the past year, and I just got a report this morning from this chapter. They have added almost 10 new members just in the month of May. So they are definitely trending in the right direction. They are now growing membership in a net way. And so I think they use this benchmarking study to help them do that. And I think that was a win. Second case study I'll share with you is a small metro chapter that we have. They also use the self-assessment to benchmark their member services. They wanted to see, as many of you know, with small chapters, they have to be really, really selective about the member services that they do offer because they only have so much bandwidth, they only have so many resources, they only have so many people. And so this chapter exec really wanted to see what are other chapters in metro areas that are my size, what are they doing? What other services are they offering? So it led to a conversation with the board about the chapter's value proposition. And the result, the chapter has now undertaken several pilots and experiments, and they're leading the way with some of our other chapters in terms of how they are rolling out and trying new member services that solve problems. For instance, this chapter rolled out a new app for their members that allows their members to be able to see building permits that are going up in the city. This was a huge, huge benefit to the members, and it helps them solve a problem. So if you can find something that points to an area of need or a solution that your members are looking for, then and solve that problem, then you're adding value and you're growing membership. The third and the final case study that I'll share with you today is from a large statewide chapter. They use this self-assessment to share year-end performance with their board. They've been doing it for the last 4 years. They take key performance pieces, they compare themselves to other chapters, and they're able to go to their board and say, okay, this is how we stack up. It engages the board in some strategic conversations about the future. It allows them to focus on the things that matter. And it really makes the board members smarter about how the chapter's performing. And it allows them to really look, you know, the members on the board are contractors. They just want to go build stuff. They're great business people, but they're not association management people. They don't necessarily know how to run a nonprofit or a chapter. And so it's really important to, and our chapter, this chapter has used this data to be able to better inform their board members about how they stack up. And it sets the stage for some really, really impactful and strategic conversations around the chapter's value proposition. So out of this benchmarking tool, there were a number of tools that grew out of this. We knew that if we measured how our chapters were doing, that we were going to learn, and our chapters were going to learn that they needed assistance in some way. They needed to improve in those 5 categories that I showed you earlier. So we did a number of things. We worked with that ELC group to develop a chapter resources warehouse. This is a compilation of all kinds of resources that a chapter might want and need. Things like, I'll give you some examples, things like bylaws, like standardized bylaws, HR manuals. We found out through this assessment that a number of our chapters, they didn't have an employee performance review process. They didn't even have an HR manual. And so we took the chapters that had these best-in-class resources and we built this resource warehouse. We continue to clean this resource out. We continue to make sure that what's in there is relevant. And we listen to our chapters. They tell us what they need, and we make sure that we build and we go find the resources to help them. We also developed a peer group and executive coaching program. We work with two executive coaches that are familiar with our organization and they're familiar with association management best practices. This program has helped a number of those new executives who are really trying to find their sea legs and get up to speed. It allows them to come together and really be open about what they're challenged with and work on things in that self-assessment that they really feel like they need to improve upon. We give them access to a mentoring program. If somebody is new or somebody is looks like they need improvement in a number of areas, we match them with another chapter exec somewhere in the network that can really kind of help them. I always tell chapters, there's no problem that you are going to face that another chapter has not already experienced. Let us connect you with people who can help you get through this. And then we also offer annual best practices programs. So whether it's in financial best practices, whether it's membership, marketing, communications, we stand these programs up and we bring chapter staff and chapter execs together to learn from each other. Some high-level lessons learned. One of the things that became really apparent when we kicked this off was that the younger CEOs and leaders, and they happen to be some of the newer execs that came on board, that are coming on board, they're more transparent, they're more upfront, and they're more open about what they don't know. They want data, they want metrics, they want tools to help them continuously improve the association. And we found that this benchmarking study was a step in the right direction. They really appreciated it, and they really, every year, they just dig in deeper and deeper. We also learned that you got to start somewhere. Like, if you're looking at doing something like this for your association and for your chapters, start small. That's what we did. Learn as you go. Figure out what questions you should be asking. Focus on, first and foremost, though, measure what matters. I think throwing a lot of questions onto a survey and measuring things that really shouldn't be measured, and I'll give you an example. So we have a lot of chapters that have young leadership programs, and those young leadership programs do things like community service. They fundraise. They might get involved in workforce development. They might mentor a student chapter. Those are things that we count in this survey and in this benchmarking tool. There's no score that we assess or that we give to what one group does or another group does. I mean, what works in Charlotte, North Carolina, and what those members want might be totally different than what the members up in Spokane, Washington want. Involve the chapters in the process. This was so important. People support what they help to create. We all know that. And so we made sure that we were bringing together our chapter executives, that they were creating the tool that all of the chapter network would end up using. And the last thing I'll say is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of good enough. We have tweaked this assessment year in and year out. We listen to our chapter executives. They tell us, they give us input every year about what they like, what they don't like. They talk with us about their scores. They talk with us about what should be counted and what should be scored. And so it really, truly has been a partnership. So you've got to involve the people who are going to be impacted by all of this. So I've done a lot of talking. I've shared a lot of information, but I'd really like to open it up now and see if anybody has any questions.
Well, thanks, Christy. That was great. Carrie is gonna, we had some questions come in through the chat, and Carrie was carefully monitoring them. And so we have 5 minutes for Q&A. So Carrie, take it away.
All right, great. I think just a couple quick things first. I know, Christy, that was awesome. Thank you so much. The slides will be shared. And one of the questions, Christy, is whether you'd be comfortable sharing the survey questions as well.
I definitely would be
Okay.
willing to share the survey questions. Absolutely.
Awesome. So I'll start with some of just the reception of how this was. Was there much resistance to the idea of this tool and this survey that from your chapters when you rolled it out?
So not really, because we really made sure that we communicated along the way and that we brought people together and we really crowdsourced and we talked about what this survey was going to be, what it wasn't going to be, because we knew that we were going to have some individuals perhaps who were going to be shall we say, not trusting of what was going to happen with the data. We knew that that was going to be a concern. And so we wanted to just put that on the table up front and talk about what it was going to be and what it wasn't. And we let them know that we weren't sharing this with the National Board of Directors, that their results were their results. If we reported anything, it was going to be anonymized, and we were only going to look at big picture things, and we were only going to report on demographic information.
So there's really no way for anyone to be at the bottom of the list, so to speak, in any kind of public way.
No, absolutely not. And the minute you do that, the minute I do that, I'm going to kill this program.
Yep. So do you do then, one of the other questions was, how do you recognize and either through awards or some other kind of way, the successes that various categories are having so that you are highlighting with carrots and not sticks?
Absolutely. So we do have an awards program, a chapter awards program. We have not tied the awards program to the assessment very closely, other than to ask the question, have you completed it? And I will tell you, if a chapter doesn't complete it, then they're not eligible for an award. But we have not really gone that step. I think the way in which we've used and we've highlighted and spotlighted the chapters that really are high performing is that we put them on panels. We do webinars with them. We set up Let's Talk membership calls where we put together and we have those chapters tell their stories, talk about how they've gotten from point A to point B and how they're celebrating those challenges and conquering those challenges, if you will. And that in and of itself has helped chapters tremendously.
And then did you have any, since this was kind of self-reported data, was there any concern that of the integrity of the data, that maybe there's any spinning of results, or were people pretty much, you felt pretty comfortable that it was the truth?
Sure. That's a great question. That's always a concern when you do a self-assessment. What I would say and what we said to the chapters is there's no benefit to fudging the numbers. I mean, if you want to fudge the numbers, you certainly can do that, and then you can present that to the board. It's not really going to help you move the needle on your operations. It's not going to help you grow membership. And so I think most people who fill it out, and the folks that might want to do that, probably aren't filling it out to begin with.
Couple quick questions on how the structure of the benchmarking itself. How did you decide on the segments where they could use to kind of compare themselves to a peer group? And was that preset, or could they dynamically pick how they wanted to compare themselves?
They can dynamically go into the system, and they can choose and slice and dice and filter the data however they want to. The only stipulation is if they filter too far, if there are fewer than 5 chapters in the results, the system will not give them any overall results. So there have to be at least 5 chapters as part of
Any
or
comparison.
the slice and dice
Okay,
of the data.
that's awesome. And then last question, what was the overall lift in getting this up and running, for the staff's perspective and vetting the questions and testing everything and rolling it out?
Sure, sure. It was a lot of work. I mean, it was a commitment. I would say that we probably spent a year really crowdsourcing and talking about and meeting with a small group of volunteers who were chapter executives. So I said from the outset that they created a program by them for them. And that is really key here. But we probably spent 6 to 8 months just really deciding what the KPIs were going to be and what the areas were going to be. We had really kind of already started this process of deciding that we were going to do this before we started strategic planning. But we went through strategic planning and there were some things that popped out of that made us really realize, hey, and that's where we learned you can't measure everything. You shouldn't measure everything. Measure the things that matter. Count the things that should be counted. That's really, really important. Otherwise, you end up like in member service. I mean, like I was saying before, what works in Texas might not work in New England. And what members are looking for in those two different markets might be very different. So you just want to look at what's different. And don't assign any type of judgment, if you will, to one being better than the other.
Thank you so much, Christi, for
Mhm.
this great program. I saw some comments, great presentation. Thanks, Carrie, for bringing it to us. And thanks everybody for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.